A young doctor marries a paralyzed billionaire, but when she discovers the cure for his paralysis, everything changes. He begged her to stay away. She healed him anyway. But just as he learns to walk again, a shocking betrayal threatens to destroy them both. Why did he lie? And what happens when the truth finally comes out? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The rain drummed against Joy Harper's windshield as she guided her car through Savannah's historic streets. Spanish moss hung like gray curtains from ancient oaks, swaying in the morning downpour. Water pooled in the cobblestone depressions, splashing beneath her tires. Her phone buzzed again, the 5th time this morning, displaying her ex-fiancé's lawyer's number. Joy jabbed the ignore button with more force than necessary, leaving a smudge on the screen. "Not today, Marcus," she muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The betrayal still felt fresh, like a wound that refused to heal. First her mother's death, then Marcus stealing her research. It was almost too much to bear. The memory of finding his name on her patent application still made her stomach clench. The GPS directed her to turn onto a private drive lined with towering oaks. Their branches formed a canopy overhead, momentarily sheltering her from the downpour. As Mercer Manor came into view, Joy's breath caught in her throat. The mansion stood like a faded southern belle, its white columns proud but showing signs of neglect. Paint peeled from the wraparound porch, and the once manicured gardens had grown wild and unkempt. Flowering vines climbed haphazardly up trellises that leaned at precarious angles. Joy parked her car and grabbed her medical bag, making a dash through the rain to the covered entrance. Water soaked through her shoes and the hem of her pants. Before she could knock, the heavy wooden door creaked open. A woman in her 50s, wearing scrubs and a neutral expression, stood in the doorway. Deep lines etched the corners of her mouth and eyes. "Dr. Harper?" the woman asked, her voice clipped and professional. "I'm Mara Benton, the night nurse. Come in before you drown." Joy stepped into a foyer that spoke of old money and older traditions. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, its light dim in the gray morning. The air smelled of furniture polish and something else, stillness perhaps, or loneliness. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor, breaking the heavy silence. "Mr. Mercer is in the library," Mara said, leading the way down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. "Fair warning, Doctor. He's in one of his moods." They entered a vast room lined with leather-bound books that reached from floor to ceiling. Rain pattered against tall windows that looked out over the sodden gardens. Leather chairs sat unused in reading nooks. In the center of the room, a wheelchair faced the window, its occupant silent and still. "Mr. Mercer," Mara announced. "Dr. Harper is here." The wheelchair turned slowly, revealing a man who must have once commanded every room he entered. Despite his seated position, Rhett Mercer III radiated authority. Silver hair swept back from a strong face, and penetrating gray eyes assessed Joy with obvious disdain. His left hand rested uselessly in his lap, fingers slightly curled. "So," he drawled, his voice rich despite its bitter edge, "you're the latest do-gooder they've sent to fix me." His mouth twisted in a sardonic smile, pulling slightly to the right. "Tell me, Doctor, how many zeros were on the check that convinced you to waste your time here?" Joy met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. She'd faced worse than an angry patient with a sharp tongue. "Mr. Mercer, I'm here under a 90-day contract to assist with your rehabilitation. My credentials are extensive, and my time is valuable. If you'd like to review my qualifications, I'm happy to provide them. What I won't provide is a target for your frustration." Rhett's eyebrows rose slightly, perhaps the first honest reaction she'd seen from him. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before the mask of contempt returned. "Credentials?" he scoffed. "I'm sure they're impressive. Almost as impressive as your ability to cash checks." I understand you're angry, Joy replied calmly, setting her bag down on a nearby table. But disrespect won't be part of our professional relationship. Shall we begin with your morning assessment? A muscle ticked in Rhett's jaw, but he remained silent as Joy pulled out her stethoscope and blood pressure cuff. The examination proceeded in tense silence, broken only by Joy's quiet requests for him to breathe or move. His pulse was strong beneath her fingers, despite everything else that had weakened. Later, Mara showed Joy to her quarters, a comfortable suite on the second floor. Sunlight had finally broken through the clouds, casting warm rectangles on the hardwood floor. "Bathroom's through there," Mara explained, pointing to a door. "Kitchen's always stocked. Calvin, our groundskeeper, does the shopping. You'll meet him later." "How long have you worked here?" Joy asked, noting the way Mara seemed to blend into the house itself, as if she were another piece of its history. "Long enough to see better days," Mara replied cryptically, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her scrubs. "Dinner's at 6 if you want it. Mr. Mercer takes his meals alone." After Mara left, Joy unpacked her medical equipment and organized her supplies. The room was lovely, with antique furniture and views of the garden, but it felt as hollow as the rest of the house. A portrait of a beautiful woman with Rhett's eyes hung above the fireplace, watching silently. Through her window, she could see Rhett's wheelchair back in position by the library window. He sat motionless, staring out at the rain as if it held answers to questions he couldn't voice. The sight stirred something in Joy. Not pity, but recognition. She knew what it was like to have your life upended, to feel trapped by circumstances beyond your control, to watch everything you'd built crumble in your hands. That evening, Joy sat at the antique desk in her room, opening her journal to a fresh page. The leather cover was soft under her fingers, her mother's last gift before the cancer took her. The pages smelled faintly of the lavender sachet her mother had kept with it. She picked up her pen and wrote, "Sharp tongue. Angry eyes. Doesn't want to live. Let's see what he does when someone makes him." She placed the journal in the desk drawer and set her alarm for 6:30 a.m. The old house creaked and settled around her as night fell. Tomorrow would bring another battle, but Joy was used to fighting. She'd fought for her mother, for her career, and now she would fight for Rhett Mercer, whether he liked it or not. Some people were worth saving, even from themselves. The kitchen gleamed in the early morning light as Joy whisked eggs in a bowl, the soft scraping sound filling the quiet space. The marble countertops and professional-grade appliances spoke of money and privilege, but like everything else in Mercer Manor, they had a tired, unused feel to them, beautiful things gathering dust in an empty life. The whir of an electric wheelchair made her pause mid-stroke. Rhett Mercer rolled into the kitchen, his silver hair slightly disheveled, wearing an expensive silk robe that hung loose on his once powerful frame. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, suggesting another restless night. "What are you doing in my kitchen?" he demanded, his voice sharp with territorial pride. Joy continued whisking, her movements steady and unhurried. "Making breakfast. Would you like some eggs? I've added a little cheese and herbs." "Those are overcooked," he said with a dismissive wave, though she hadn't even started cooking them yet. His need to criticize was as automatic as breathing. "They're still in the bowl," Joy replied calmly, pouring the yellow mixture into a heated pan where it sizzled softly. "But when they're done, you're welcome to tell me how terrible they are. I'm sure you'll find something wrong with them." Rhett's mouth twitched, almost forming what might have been a smile. "You're not paid to be a cook. That's not in your job description." "No, but I am paid to ensure you're properly nourished." She slid the perfectly cooked eggs onto a plate, adding buttered toast and fresh fruit arranged with simple care. She set it before him with deliberate gentleness. "Eating alone isn't good for anyone. The body needs food, but the spirit needs company." Rhett stabbed at the eggs with his fork, examining them critically before taking a reluctant bite. And I suppose you're an expert on what's good for everyone, a regular fountain of wisdom. No, Joy said, sitting down across from him with her own plate. Just on what's good for my patients. That's what years of training teaches you. How to help people heal, even when they fight against it. I'm not your patient. I'm your meal ticket, he grumbled between bites. Joy took a slow sip of coffee, savoring its warmth. At 10 o'clock, we're starting physical therapy and stretching exercises. Nothing too strenuous for the first session. Rhett's laugh was harsh, echoing in the spacious kitchen. I'm not some circus dog you can train with treats and schedules. I don't perform tricks on command. No, you're not, Joy agreed, meeting his gaze directly, her eyes calm and unafraid. You're a man who had a stroke and needs rehabilitation if you want any chance at regaining your independence. I'll be in the East sitting room at 10. Whether you show up or not is your choice. Your life, your decision. She cleared their plates, noting that despite his complaints, Rhett had eaten everything on his plate, leaving not even a crumb of toast behind. At 10 o'clock sharp, Joy set up the therapy equipment in the sitting room, exercise bands, small weights, and cushions arranged neatly on the plush carpet. Rhett wasn't there, but she began her preparations anyway, humming softly to herself. Through the reflection in the tall windows, she caught glimpses of his wheelchair in the hallway, moving slightly, then stopping. He thought he was hidden from view, but she could see him watching, curiosity battling with stubborn pride. Later that morning, she found Calvin Dent trimming roses in the garden. The old groundskeeper's weathered hands moved with careful precision among the thorns, his fingers nimble despite their gnarled appearance. Decades of sun and hard work had etched deep lines into his face. Beautiful roses, Joy commented, breathing in their sweet fragrance. They must take a lot of care. Calvin nodded, a small smile softening his features. Mrs. Mercer's favorites. She had quite the green thumb. Used to spend hours out here talking to these plants like they were her friends. Swore they bloomed brighter when she sang to them. When did she pass? Joy asked gently. 5 years ago. Calvin wiped his brow with a faded handkerchief. Cancer took her quick. That's when everything changed. The house went quiet. The children stopped coming around, except through their lawyers. Haven't seen them in over 3 years now. Not even a holiday visit. Joy thought of the grand empty rooms upstairs, filled with expensive furniture but devoid of family photos or personal touches. No visits at all? Even after he got sick? Calvin shook his head, snipping a dead stem with more force than necessary. Miss Claire, that's his daughter. She sends legal papers now and then, always wanting something signed or approved. The son, Rhett Jr., he's somewhere out west. California, I think. Neither one came when their daddy had the stroke. He sighed deeply, his shoulders sagging. Used to be different. Used to be laughter in this house. Little ones running around these gardens. Family dinners that lasted for hours. Later that afternoon, Joy noticed Rhett in the library. He thought he was alone, and his guard was down as he stroked a silver-framed photograph on the mantel, his fingers trembling slightly. His expression was soft, almost vulnerable. The hard lines around his mouth relaxed, eyes glistening with unshed tears. So different from his usual scowl that Joy found herself staring. When he sensed her presence, the mask slammed back into place like shutters closing against a storm. "Don't you have something better to do than spy on me?" he snapped, wheeling the chair around to face her. "Actually, I was looking for books to unpack in my room." She gestured to the cardboard box in her arms. "But I can come back later if you'd prefer to be alone." "Do whatever you want. You will anyway." He turned away, but not before she caught the slight redness around his eyes. In her room, Joy sorted through the books she'd brought, arranging medical texts and novels on the small bookshelf by the window. A leather album slipped from between 2 thick textbooks, landing with a soft thud on the carpet. It had been mixed in with the library books she'd collected earlier. Curious, she opened it carefully. The pages were filled with photographs. Rhett in his younger days, tall and commanding in expensive suits, his smile confident and warm, eyes bright with ambition and joy. In one picture, he danced with a beautiful woman in a garden full of roses, her head thrown back in laughter as he twirled her. Another showed him teaching a young boy to fish, his hands guiding small fingers on the rod, while a little girl in pigtails watched from the dock, clutching a stuffed bear. The images showed a different man, someone who laughed easily, who held his wife close under starlit skies, who played with his children on summer afternoons. Joy traced the edges of the photos with gentle fingers, understanding blooming in her heart like a slow sunrise. All that bitterness, all that cruelty. It wasn't who he was. It was armor he'd built, layer by layer, loss by loss, to protect what remained of his broken heart. That night, Joy closed her bedroom door and turned the lock, her body tired from the day's work, but her mind still active. The house was quiet, except for soft jazz music drifting through the wall from the library down the hall. The melody was slow and sweet, filled with longing and memory. She recognized the tune, "What a Wonderful World," and found herself smiling faintly as she turned out the light, the moonlight casting silver shadows across her bed. The music played on, a gentle reminder that somewhere inside that bitter shell was a man who still remembered how to feel, who still reached for beauty in the darkness. Joy drifted off to sleep, the jazz notes weaving through her dreams like threads of hope in the darkness, promising that healing, for both of them, might still be possible. The morning sun cast long shadows through the kitchen windows as Joy prepared a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. The house felt unusually quiet, even for Mercer Manor. Calvin's heavy footsteps in the hallway broke the silence, each step a solemn announcement of his approach. The elderly groundskeeper's face was drawn and pale as he entered, his normally steady hands trembling slightly. "Doctor Harper," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've got some sad news. Miss Pearl. She passed away in her sleep last night." Joy's hand trembled as she set down her coffee cup, a small splash of dark liquid spilling onto the pristine countertop. Though she'd only been at the manor for 2 days, she'd heard enough about Pearl to know she was the heart of the household, the glue that held everything together. Oh no. Does Mr. Mercer know? Her chest tightened with unexpected grief for a woman she'd never met. Mara told him first thing. Calvin's weathered hands fidgeted with his cap, turning it round and round between his fingers. "We're having a small service in the garden at 11. Pearl would have wanted it that way. She loved those roses she tended, spent hours out there, talking to them like they were her children. By mid-morning, the garden had been prepared with loving care. Despite the general neglect of the grounds, Pearl's rose garden remained immaculate, a testament to her dedication and the one spot of perfect beauty amid the decay. 4 chairs were arranged in a semicircle, with space left for Rhett's wheelchair at the center, where he could face the blooms that Pearl had cherished. Joy watched as Mara helped Rhett navigate the garden path, the wheels of his chair catching occasionally on the uneven stones. His usual mask of irritation was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable that made him look years older. He clutched a Bible in his lap, his knuckles white against the leather cover, a thumb marking a specific page. Calvin spoke first, his voice rough with emotion, removing his cap and holding it against his chest. "Pearl Martinez served this house for 38 years. She was more than staff. She was family. The kind of family you choose, that chooses you right back." Mara shared a few memories, her typically professional demeanor cracking to reveal genuine sorrow, then nodded to Rhett. His hands shook as he opened the Bible to a marked page, the paper rustling loudly in the quiet garden. "Pearl, she asked me to read this if..." He cleared his throat, blinking rapidly. "From Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd." His voice cracked on the words, and Joy found herself blinking back tears, surprised by the depth of her own emotion. This was a different Rhett Mercer than the bitter man she'd met 2 days ago. Here was someone capable of love, of loss, of human connection. The service concluded quietly, the small group sitting in respectful silence as a gentle breeze carried the scent of roses around them. But before anyone could leave, a black town car pulled up the manor's circular drive, tires crunching on the gravel. A man in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a leather briefcase, his polished shoes gleaming in the sunlight. "Mr. Brunner," Calvin acknowledged as the lawyer approached the garden with measured steps. "I apologize for interrupting such a solemn occasion," Brunner said, his tone professionally sympathetic. But Miss Pearl left explicit instructions about timing. She wanted certain matters addressed immediately following her memorial. She was quite insistent. They relocated to the manor's study, where heavy curtains filtered the sunlight into muted beams that highlighted the dust in the air. Brunner opened his briefcase and removed several documents with practiced precision. Miss Pearl made some unusual arrangements in her final days, he began, adjusting his reading glasses on the bridge of his nose, primarily concerning Dr. Harper and Mr. Mercer. Joy sat straighter in her chair, her spine stiffening with sudden apprehension. What could Pearl possibly have arranged that involved her? She'd never even spoken to the woman. "According to these legally binding documents," Brunner continued, tapping a manicured finger against the paper, "Dr. Joy Harper is listed as Mr. Mercer's wife and medical guardian, with full estate-level authority." The room fell silent, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out in an instant. Joy felt the blood drain from her face, a cold wave of shock washing over her. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Rhett's face darkened with rage, color flooding back into his pale cheeks. "This is absurd! She's been here 2 days!" He wheeled around to face Joy, nearly tipping his chair in his fury. "What did you do? Did you conspire with Pearl while I was sleeping, looking for a piece of the estate? Is that what this is about?" Joy shot to her feet, her own anger flaring hot and bright. "How dare you? I never even spoke to Pearl. I demand an explanation, Mr. Brunner." Her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. The lawyer calmly reached into his briefcase and withdrew an envelope, yellowed slightly with age. Pearl left this letter to be read at this moment. He broke the seal with a letter opener and unfolded a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. The blue ink faded, but still legible. "That man don't need another nurse," Brunner read, his professional voice giving way to the cadence of Pearl's words. "He needs someone who'll burn down the prison he built around his heart." Joy sank back into her chair, stunned into silence, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Rhett's face had gone from rage to confusion, his brows drawn together as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. "This is legally binding?" Mara asked quietly from her corner of the room, her practical nature asserting itself. "Completely," Brunner confirmed with a curt nod. Miss Pearl ensured everything was properly executed and notarized. She was meticulous about the details. Joy stood again, her voice shaking with emotion. "This is insane. I'm leaving. I can't be part of whatever this is." She turned toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of what Pearl had done. "Wait." Rhett's voice was different, softer, almost uncertain, with none of its usual sharp edges. The anger had drained from his face, replaced by something closer to resignation, perhaps even a flicker of curiosity. "Just wait." The room cleared slowly. First Brunner with a polite nod, then Calvin and Mara with sympathetic glances, leaving Joy and Rhett alone with the weight of Pearl's final instructions, hanging between them like an invisible thread. Hours passed in a blur. Joy spent them in her room, packing and unpacking her suitcase, unable to decide what to do, her thoughts chasing themselves in endless circles. The sun had long since set, painting the sky in deep purples and blues, when she heard the familiar sound of Rhett's wheelchair in the hallway, the rhythmic squeak of its wheels against the wooden floor. He appeared in her doorway, his face in shadow, the hallway light creating a silhouette of his broken form. "Let's make a deal," he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual bite. "I let the papers stand. You stay 1 year. I fund your clinic, no questions asked." Joy stared at him, her mind racing with the implications, the complications, the sheer impossibility of the situation. She turned to look out the window at the darkened garden where Pearl's roses swayed in the night breeze, their shapes just visible in the moonlight. "A wife," she whispered to herself, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "Lord, what have I walked into?" She wondered if somewhere Pearl was watching, perhaps even smiling at the chaos she had created. Joy stared at the cream-colored envelope that had been slipped under her door. The morning light filtered through her window, casting a soft glow on the crisp paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up, the weight of what it represented settling heavily in her chest. Inside was the formal agreement, typed in neat legal language. It laid out the terms clearly. She would be Rhett's legal wife and medical guardian for 1 year, and in return, he would fund her clinic. Simple words that would change everything. She sat at the small desk in her room, pen hovering over the signature line. Was she really going to do this? Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Sometimes the craziest choices lead us exactly where we need to be. Taking a deep breath, she signed her name with careful strokes, watching as the ink dried and sealed her fate. At breakfast, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. Rhett wheeled himself to the table where Joy had set out coffee and toast. His silver hair caught the morning light, and for a moment, she glimpsed the handsome man he must have been before bitterness etched itself into his features. "Good morning, Mrs. Mercer," he said with exaggerated formality, his mouth quirking up at one corner. "Or should I be Mr. Harper now? I'm progressive enough to take your name." Joy buttered her toast with deliberate movements, trying to ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach. "I'd prefer to keep things professional, Mr. Mercer." "Professional?" He chuckled darkly. "We're married now, dear, even if it's just on paper." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "This arrangement doesn't change our doctor-patient relationship." After breakfast, Joy retreated to her makeshift office, spreading out Rhett's medical files across the desk. Something about his previous diagnoses had been nagging at her for days. The MRI scans from different hospitals showed subtle inconsistencies that most doctors might have missed. She pulled out her magnifying glass, studying the timestamps and notations carefully, her forehead creased in concentration. A knock at the door made her jump. Mara stood in the doorway, her face unreadable, posture rigid. "Your tea, doctor." "Harper." She set down the cup with precise movements. "Or should I say Mrs. Mercer now?" "Doctor." "Harper is fine, Mara. Nothing has changed." Joy tried to sound casual, though the tension in the room was palpable. Mara's lips tightened slightly. "Everything's changed, doctor. You're the lady of the house now, even if it's just legal fiction." Her words carried a hint of judgment that wasn't lost on Joy. Joy watched the nurse leave, noting how her back was slightly stiffer than usual. Even Calvin, usually so friendly with his warm smile and cheerful greetings, had barely nodded to her this morning. She understood their reaction. It must look strange, even suspicious, for a doctor to suddenly become the patient's wife. The afternoon mail brought what she'd been expecting: letters from Rhett's children's lawyers. She recognized the prestigious law firm logos on the envelopes, bold and intimidating. Without opening them, she could guess their contents: threats, accusations, demands for explanations. She placed them in her desk drawer, unopened but impossible to ignore. As evening settled over the manor, Joy couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial in Rhett's medical history. After dinner, she waited until Mara had given Rhett his evening medication and he'd fallen asleep, his breathing deep and rhythmic. The study was dark and silent as she slipped inside. Moonlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the rows of filing cabinets like silent sentinels. She found the oldest medical records in the bottom drawer, dating back to before his stroke, yellowed slightly with age. Settling into the leather chair behind the massive oak desk, Joy began to read. Hours passed as she cross-referenced symptoms, dates, and treatments. Something wasn't adding up. The original diagnosis seemed incomplete, almost rushed, as if the doctors had settled on the obvious answer without digging deeper. She found herself making notes, drawing connections between seemingly unrelated symptoms, her medical training guiding her through the maze of information. Her eyes widened as she came across a detail that had been overlooked in the initial emergency assessment. The stroke hadn't been the only factor affecting his mobility. There was something else, something that might explain why traditional therapies hadn't worked. Joy pulled out her phone, fingers moving quickly as she scheduled urgent diagnostic tests at a nearby medical center. This wasn't just the stroke, she whispered to herself, staring at the papers spread before her, heart racing with the possibility of a breakthrough. The moon had shifted position in the sky, casting new shadows across the study floor. Joy gathered the files, her mind racing with possibilities. She needed more tests to confirm her suspicion, but for the first time since arriving at Mercer Manor, she felt a spark of real hope. Back in her room, she pulled out her phone one more time, scheduling a rush diagnostic at the closest specialized lab. As she set the phone down, her gaze fell on the marriage certificate sitting on her desk. Whatever complications this arrangement might bring, if it helped her heal Rhett, maybe it would be worth it. Perhaps this strange path would lead to healing for both of them in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The morning sun cast long shadows across the winding roads of Savannah as Joy navigated her car through the quiet outskirts of the city. Her fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel, while a thick manila envelope filled with medical records sat on the passenger seat beside her. Inside were Rhett's original scans, recent blood work, and her carefully documented observations from the past few days. She'd stayed up half the night reviewing everything, searching for patterns others might have missed. The private diagnostic lab was housed in a modern building with reflective windows and clean lines, a stark contrast to the historic architecture of downtown Savannah. Joy pulled into an empty parking spot and gathered her materials, double-checking that she hadn't forgotten anything. Her heart pounded with anticipation and worry as she locked her car. Inside, the lab was cool and sterile, with the faint scent of disinfectant hanging in the air. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked up as Joy approached the desk. "Doctor? Harper? We've been expecting you." Joy nodded, placing the envelope on the counter. "I need these processed as quickly as possible. I'm paying out of pocket for expedited results." She pulled out her credit card, trying not to wince at the cost. It would be worth it if her suspicions were correct. The amount would put a serious dent in her savings, but some things couldn't wait. Back at Mercer Manor, Joy found Rhett in the library, staring out the window at the garden. His wheelchair was positioned perfectly to catch the morning light, though she doubted he'd chosen the spot for its warmth. His profile looked etched against the brightness, highlighting the stubborn set of his jaw. "Time for your morning treatment," she announced, wheeling in an IV stand with practiced efficiency. Rhett's eyes narrowed, suspicion immediately darkening his features. "What's this about?" "Just a new circulatory protocol I want to try," Joy explained, keeping her voice casual as she prepared his arm. "It should help improve blood flow to your extremities." She didn't mention her growing theory. No sense giving him hope that might be crushed. "Trying to fix the unfixable?" he scoffed, but held out his arm anyway. The morning light caught the fine lines around his eyes, testament to years of hardship and disappointment. Joy cleaned the injection site with practiced efficiency. "Nothing's unfixable until we've tried everything." She inserted the fourth line with gentle precision, noting how his muscles tensed, then relaxed at her touch. "You sound like one of those motivational posters in a dentist's office," Rhett grumbled, but she noticed he didn't pull away. There was almost a hint of amusement buried beneath his usual gruff exterior. Throughout the morning, Joy kept herself busy with paperwork while monitoring Rhett's reaction to the treatment. She incorporated subtle mobility exercises into his routine, masking them as simple comfort adjustments. Each time she approached him, she studied his face for signs of discomfort or, hopefully, unusual sensation. "Shift your weight to the left," she instructed, adjusting his position. "It'll help with circulation." Her hands were gentle but firm as she guided his body. Rhett complied with a grunt, though his face showed signs of discomfort. "Feels strange," he muttered, forehead creasing slightly. "Strange how?" Joy asked, trying to keep her voice neutral while her pulse quickened with interest. "Just different. Achy." He shrugged, clearly unwilling to elaborate, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of confusion at the unfamiliar sensations. By early afternoon, Joy's phone buzzed with an incoming email. She excused herself to her room, hands shaking slightly as she opened the lab results. Her eyes scanned the report quickly, heart racing as her suspicions were confirmed. Chronic Lyme disease, previously undiagnosed, complicated by a minor spinal stroke. She sank onto the edge of her bed, mind whirling with possibilities. The implications were enormous. With the right treatment, aggressive antibiotics combined with specialized neurostimulation therapy, there was a real chance of improvement, perhaps even significant recovery. She pressed a hand to her mouth, containing the surge of excitement that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. Joy spent the next hour developing a comprehensive treatment plan, scribbling notes and researching protocols on her laptop. She would need to be careful, strategic in how she implemented it. Rhett's bitter resignation to his condition ran deep, and false hope could be devastating. Better to proceed under the guise of general treatment while watching for signs of improvement. She couldn't bear to see him crushed if things didn't progress as she hoped. That afternoon, she began the first round of targeted therapy. "We're going to try some new stretches," she told him, manipulating his legs with practiced care. Her fingers worked methodically, feeling for the slightest response in his muscles. "Waste of time," Rhett muttered, but she noticed him watching her movements with unusual intensity. His hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair a little tighter than necessary. "Maybe," she replied, continuing the exercises. "But it's my time to waste." She offered him a small smile, which he didn't return, though his gaze lingered on her face. As the day progressed, Rhett's complaints about discomfort increased. "Everything aches," he growled during their evening session, shifting restlessly in his chair. "Whatever you're doing, it's making things worse." Beads of sweat had formed on his forehead despite the room's comfortable temperature. Joy maintained her professional demeanor, though inside her heart was soaring. Pain meant sensation. Sensation meant hope. "Your body's just adjusting to the new treatment," she assured him, handing him a glass of water. "Try to rest. We'll continue tomorrow." That evening, Joy made her final rounds before bed, her footsteps quiet against the polished wooden floors. She found Rhett in his room, already settled for the night, the soft glow of his bedside lamp casting shadows across his tired face. As she adjusted his blanket, a routine check she'd performed dozens of times before, he suddenly frowned. "Is there a draft?" he asked, his voice puzzled, almost vulnerable. Joy kept her face carefully neutral, though her heart skipped a beat. "Number Y. Thought I felt something on my leg." He looked genuinely confused, as if his own body had become a stranger to him. "Could be your imagination," she said calmly, though her pulse quickened at his words. She tucked the blanket around him with extra care. fighting to keep her hands steady. She walked out of the room, closing the door quietly behind her. Only then did she allow herself to smile, joy spreading through her chest like warmth from a summer sun. The first sign of returning sensation. It was working. It was actually working. She pressed her back against the hallway wall, closed her eyes, and allowed herself one moment of pure, unadulterated hope. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around Mercer Manor like a thick, oppressive blanket. At exactly 5 a.m., a strangled, anguished cry suddenly pierced the otherwise quiet stillness of the grand estate. Joy's eyes snapped open, her senses instantly alert, and she was moving swiftly down the hallway to Rhett's room before her mind had fully registered the reason for the distressed sound. She found Rhett tangled in his sheets, his chest heaving and fingers scrambling desperately to reach the emergency call bell that had fallen just out of his grasp. Without hesitation, Joy crossed the room and placed a steady, reassuring hand on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering rapidly against her palm. "Breathe with me," she said softly, her voice calm and soothing. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. Nice and slow." Rhett's wild, panicked eyes found hers in the dim light of the room. Sweat matted his silver hair to his forehead, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated terror. "I was there again," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "On the floor of my study, just like that day." Joy reached for the glass of water on his nightstand and helped him take a few small sips, waiting patiently for him to continue. "I'd been working late," Rhett said, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. "The kids were supposed to visit that weekend. I remember thinking I needed to finish reviewing those contracts before they arrived." His hand trembled as he spoke, the water glass shaking slightly. "When it hit, I knew exactly what was happening. My father died of a stroke. The same symptoms." Joy gently took the glass from him and set it aside, her heart aching for the pain and vulnerability she saw in his eyes. "I couldn't reach my phone," he continued, his voice cracking with anguish. "Couldn't call for help. I just lay there, watching the shadows move across the ceiling as the hours passed." Rhett's bitter laugh held no humor. "No one found me until morning. By then, the damage was done." "The kids never came that weekend," he added, the bitterness in his tone cutting deep. "Or any weekend after. Can't blame them, really. Who wants to watch their father turn into a helpless invalid?" "You're not helpless," Joy said firmly, her unwavering gaze meeting his. "Aren't I?" Rhett gestured weakly at his wheelchair. "I built an empire from nothing. Now I can't even dress myself without assistance." "And that terrifies you," Joy observed gently. "Not just the physical limitations, but the hope that things might change." Rhett's eyes narrowed slightly, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his expression. "Don't psychoanalyze me, Doctor." "I'm not," Joy assured him, settling into the chair beside his bed. "I understand the fear of hope all too well. When my mother was dying, every new treatment brought a fresh wave of it, and every failure hurt worse than the last." Something in Rhett's expression softened, a flicker of empathy sparking in his eyes. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said quietly. Joy nodded, surprised by her own willingness to open up. "After she passed, I threw myself into my research, developed a proposal for a free clinic in her name. My fiancé." She swallowed hard, the old pain still raw. "He took my work, presented it as his own. By the time I discovered what he'd done, the funding was approved with his name on everything." "Bastard," Rhett muttered, his jaw clenching in anger on her behalf. "The medical community believed him over me. My reputation, ... Joy shrugged, a wry, self-deprecating smile tugging at her lips. "Well, let's just say taking this job wasn't entirely my choice." They sat in companionable silence as the sky outside began to lighten, the first golden rays of dawn peeking through the windows. Later that morning, when Joy helped Rhett with his usual grooming routine, she noticed his hands were steadier as she assisted him in applying the shaving cream. "I used to do this without thinking," he said, watching their reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Now it's a daily reminder of everything I've lost." Joy met his eyes in the mirror, her own gaze filled with understanding and a glimmer of hope. "Or everything you might regain." His hand lifted slightly, as if reaching toward her cheek, but then it stopped, and the shame in his voice was palpable as he whispered, "I don't want to want this." She didn't speak, just covered his hand with hers and squeezed gently, offering her silent support and reassurance. That evening, Joy discovered Rhett in the library, holding a worn, well-loved copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "My wife's favorite," he explained, his voice tinged with wistfulness. "She used to read it aloud to the children." Joy took the book carefully, reverently, as if it were a precious treasure. "Would you like me to read some?" she asked softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'd like that." She settled into a comfortable chair and began to read, her soothing voice filling the room. Rhett closed his eyes, letting the familiar words wash over him, and they fell into an easy rhythm. Joy reading, Rhett occasionally commenting on a particular passage. The silences between chapters felt natural, peaceful, a moment of respite in the midst of their emotional turmoil. As Joy walked back to her room that night, Rhett's voice stopped her in the hallway. "Don't stop what you're doing." She turned, meeting his gaze with a steady, unwavering expression. "The therapy?" He nodded slowly, his eyes searching her face. "Just don't give me false hope." Joy's answer was soft but firm, a promise that carried the weight of her own painful experiences. "I won't." Joy walked into the therapy room, the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows, casting long golden rectangles across the polished floor. The walking harness felt heavy in her hands, not from its actual weight, but from what it represented: hope, possibility, and the terrifying chance of failure. Rhett sat motionless in his wheelchair, staring out at the manicured gardens beyond the glass, his profile sharp against the brightness outside. She knelt beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "It's time." Rhett's jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the armrests of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white, the veins standing out prominently. "I can't," he whispered, his voice rough with fear and something deeper, shame. "You can," Joy said, laying her hand over his. The warmth of his skin surprised her. "The tests show improvement. Your legs have been responding to the treatment. We've been building to this moment for weeks now." He turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. The proud businessman was nowhere to be seen. "What if I fall?" "Then I'll catch you," she said simply. "I promise." She held his gaze, willing him to believe her. After several long moments, Rhett gave a slight nod. Joy helped position him between the parallel bars, securing the harness around his torso with practiced movements. She could feel him trembling beneath her touch, his breath coming faster. "Hold the bars," she instructed, standing close behind him, close enough to smell his cologne. "I've got you." Rhett's hands wrapped around the metal bars, his grip white-knuckled and desperate. His breathing came in short, sharp bursts that echoed in the quiet room. Joy placed her hands firmly on his hips, supporting his weight, feeling the tension in every muscle. "Now push up with your arms," she said. "Let your legs remember what they know." Slowly, painfully, Rhett began to rise. His arms shook with effort, muscles straining beneath his shirt. Sweat beaded on his forehead and trickled down his temple. But inch by agonizing inch, he lifted himself upward. And then, he was standing. His legs wobbled dangerously beneath him, but they held. 10 seconds passed in complete silence, marked only by Rhett's labored breathing and the steady tick of the wall clock counting the miracle. "I'm standing," he whispered in disbelief, voice cracking. "Dear God, I'm standing." The moment was brief. His strength gave out suddenly, and he sagged backward with a gasp. Joy caught him as promised, her body bracing against his weight, helping him ease back into the wheelchair. But when she moved to step away, Rhett grabbed her arms and pulled her close, burying his face against her shoulder. His body shook with sobs, deep, racking cries that seemed to come from his very soul. Joy held him tightly, one hand cradling the back of his head, her own tears falling silently into his silver hair. They stayed that way for a long time, wrapped in an embrace that spoke of triumph and terror, hope and healing, neither willing to be the first to let go. Later that evening, they sat together on the veranda. The air was heavy with jasmine, and crickets chirped in the gathering dusk. Fireflies winked in the garden beyond. Rhett stared at his hands, folded in his lap, the same hands that had once signed million-dollar contracts. "I've been angry for so long," he said quietly. "Angry at my body for betraying me. Angry at my children for abandoning me. Angry at the world for moving on while I sat still." He looked up at Joy, his eyes catching the last light of day. "But mostly, I've been angry at myself for giving up." Joy reached out, covering his hand with hers. "You didn't give up. You're here now. You're trying. That takes more courage than most people will ever know." "Because of you," he said. His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and surprisingly strong. "You saw what everyone else missed. You didn't let me hide behind my bitterness." The space between them seemed to shrink, the evening air growing thick with unspoken feelings. Joy could feel her heart pounding as Rhett leaned closer. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, tentative and gentle, as if she might pull away. "I haven't felt alive in years," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Until you." Their lips met in a kiss that was soft and uncertain at first, then deepened with growing certainty. The world around them faded, the crickets, the scent of flowers, the approaching night, until there was only this moment. When they finally pulled apart, Joy rested her forehead against his, both of them breathing deeply. That night, neither wanted to be alone. They ended up in Rhett's room, Joy curled in an armchair beside his bed, a blanket draped over her legs. They talked late into the night about everything and nothing. Their fears, their dreams, their favorite books, childhood memories they'd never shared with anyone else. Eventually, they drifted off to sleep, their hands still linked across the space between them, a bridge neither wanted to break. When Joy woke the next morning, pale sunlight was filtering through the curtains, painting the room in soft pastels. She stretched, working out the kinks from sleeping in the chair, and made her way to the kitchen where breakfast was usually served, her mind still half dreaming. On her breakfast tray, nestled between the coffee cup and plate of eggs, sat a small velvet box. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, her breath catching. Inside was a vintage ring, delicate and beautiful, with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like tears. Beneath the box was a note written in Rhett's distinctive handwriting, slightly shaky but determined. "Let's do it for real, not for money, not for show, for us." Joy stared at the ring, speechless, her heart hammering against her ribs, as morning light caught the diamonds and sent tiny rainbows dancing across the tablecloth like promises waiting to be kept. The heavy iron gates of Mercer Manor crashed open with a sound that echoed through the afternoon quiet. Joy looked up from her medical notes at the commotion, watching through the library window as a sleek black Mercedes screeched to a halt in the circular driveway. 3 figures emerged, a tall, elegant woman in a designer suit, flanked by 2 men carrying leather briefcases. Their purposeful strides spoke of trouble brewing. "Dad!" A sharp voice rang through the mansion's halls. "Where are you?" Joy's stomach tightened into a knot. She knew without asking. This had to be Claire Mercer. She'd seen her in the family photos scattered throughout the house, though the woman storming through the foyer looked nothing like the smiling teenager in those old pictures. The years had hardened her features into something cold and calculating. Rhett wheeled himself into view from the study, his knuckles white against the armrests. "Claire?" His voice carried a mix of surprise and wariness. "What are you doing here? I didn't expect you." Claire's heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached, her face tight with anger. The sound echoed like tiny hammers against Joy's nerves. "What am I doing here? Perhaps you'd like to explain this?" She thrust a stack of papers toward him, the edges crumpled from her grip. Marriage documents. Medical guardianship. What kind of scheme is this? Joy stepped forward, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Ms. Mercer, I'm Dr. Joy Harper. I can explain dash." "Oh, I'm sure you can," Claire cut her off, her tone dripping with disdain. Her eyes, so like her father's, narrowed to slits. "I'm sure you have a perfectly reasonable explanation for marrying my father and gaining control of his estate within weeks of arriving here." One of the lawyers cleared his throat, adjusting his expensive tie. "We have evidence suggesting potential manipulation and exploitation of a vulnerable patient, Dr. Harper. These are serious allegations." "That's ridiculous," Rhett interjected, his face flushing with anger, but Claire wasn't finished. "Is it, Dad? Because I've reviewed her background thoroughly. A failed engagement, a lost research grant, mounting debt from her mother's medical bills." Claire's eyes narrowed at Joy, her lips curling into a sneer. "You needed money, didn't you? And my father was an easy target, wealthy, isolated, and vulnerable." "You don't know what you're talking about," Joy said, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "The marriage was Miss Pearl's idea." Yes, the convenient deathbed arrangement," the second lawyer interrupted, his voice smooth as oil. "We'll be investigating that as well, quite thoroughly, I might add." Calvin appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. Mara stood behind him, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes, her normally composed expression cracking with worry. Claire pulled out another document from her leather portfolio with the precision of someone delivering a fatal blow. "We've already contacted the state medical board. They're very interested in reviewing your treatment protocols, Dr. Harper, particularly your unauthorized experimental therapies. They might find your methods questionable." Joy felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her lightheaded. "Those treatments are helping him recover. The results speak for themselves." "Are they?" Claire challenged, stepping closer until Joy could smell her expensive perfume. "Or are you just giving him false hope to maintain your position here? To keep your hands on his money?" "That's enough." Rhett's voice boomed through the room, startling everyone. "Claire, you have no right." "I have every right," Claire shouted back, whirling to face her father. "I'm trying to protect you. Can't you see what she's doing? She's manipulating you, Dad." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the tall windows, they could see cars pulling up, news vans with satellite dishes, reporters with cameras already filming the mansion. "How did they—" Joy started, her throat constricting with panic. "Anonymous tip," Claire said coldly, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "The press loves a good scandal. Gold-digging doctor seduces disabled billionaire? That'll run for weeks. Your reputation will be in tatters." Joy turned to Rhett, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Tell them," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell them the truth about us, about your progress, about everything we've accomplished." Rhett looked from Joy to the growing media circus outside, then to his daughter's hard expression. Something shifted in his eyes, fear, maybe, or resignation. The light she'd grown to love dimmed before her. "Dad," Claire pressed, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. "End this now, before it gets worse." Rhett wheeled himself to the window, watching the reporters gathering like vultures. When he spoke, his voice was hollow, empty of the warmth Joy had come to treasure. "I'll handle it." Minutes later, from the front steps, Rhett addressed the press. Joy stood in the shadows of the doorway, listening as the man she'd grown to love destroyed everything they'd built together. "The marriage to Dr. Harper was a business arrangement," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "A legal necessity for certain medical procedures, nothing more. There is no romantic relationship." Joy felt each word like a physical blow, each syllable cracking something vital inside her chest. She turned away, unable to watch anymore, and climbed the stairs to her room. Her hands moved mechanically, packing her belongings into her suitcase, folding clothes she barely saw through her tears. The door opened behind her. "Joy, please!" Rhett's voice was desperate now, breaking on her name. "I was trying to protect you from the media circus. You don't understand what they can do." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face, leaving hot trails on her skin. "You're not the man I thought you were." Her voice broke on the words. "I thought you were stronger than this." Without another word, Joy picked up her suitcase and walked past him. Down the grand staircase, past Claire's triumphant expression, past the concerned faces of Calvin and Mara who stood helplessly by. She pushed through the front door into the gathering darkness as the first drops of rain began to fall, spattering against the stone steps. Behind her, Rhett called her name, the sound raw with regret. But she didn't look back. The sound of rain drowned out everything else as she walked away from Mercer Manor for the last time, each step taking her further from the heart she was leaving behind. Joy stared at the pile of unopened letters on her small desk. The studio apartment felt cramped and empty at the same time, nothing like the grand spaces of Mercer Manor. Afternoon sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting long, melancholy shadows across the medical board's official letterhead. The walls seemed to press in on her, a constant reminder of how far she'd fallen. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Rhett. Like all the others over the past 2 weeks, it went unanswered. Joy's finger hovered over his name, but she couldn't bring herself to read it. The pain was still too fresh, the wound still raw and bleeding beneath her careful composure. She walked to the window, watching people hurry past on the busy downtown street below. Strangers with purpose, with direction. Her new life felt like a step backward, back to being alone, back to uncertainty. The walls of her tiny apartment seemed to close in, reminding her of everything she'd left behind. The warmth, the connection, the feeling of belonging she'd found at Mercer Manor. A firm knock at her door startled her from her thoughts, making her heart jump. "Dr. Harper." A deep, warm voice called from the hallway. "It's Pastor Brooks." Joy opened the door to find a tall, distinguished man in his 60s standing there, his kind eyes crinkling with concern. Silver hair framed a face etched with wisdom and compassion. "Pastor Elijah," she said softly. "I wasn't expecting anyone." "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion," he said, holding out a cream-colored envelope. "But I have something for you. From Pearl." Joy's hands trembled as she took the envelope. The familiar, elegant handwriting on the front read, "To Joy, when she's ready." Her throat tightened at the sight. "Pearl left this with me months ago," Pastor Elijah explained, his voice gentle. "Said I'd know when the time was right to deliver it." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'll leave you to read it in private. Remember, child, sometimes the hardest paths lead us exactly where we need to be." After he left, Joy sat on her bed, turning the envelope over in her hands. Pearl had known. Somehow she'd known everything that would unfold. With shaking fingers, Joy broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside, the paper crisp and carrying a faint scent of Pearl's lavender perfume. My dearest Joy, if you're reading this, I imagine your heart is hurting something fierce right now. That stubborn man probably did exactly what I feared he would. Let his fear speak louder than his love. But before you close your heart to him forever, there's something you need to understand about Rhett Mercer. That man has spent his whole life believing love had to be earned. His daddy was cold as January frost, and his mama wasn't much warmer. Everything in his life, success, respect, even basic affection, came with conditions. Be perfect. Be strong. Never show weakness. Then you came along. You were the first gift he never had to earn. The first person who saw past his walls and loved what was buried underneath. That terrified him more than any business deal or medical crisis ever could. You see, when you love someone who's never known real love, they'll sometimes push you away just to prove you'll leave like everyone else. But Joy, that man loves you with every broken piece of his soul. I've watched him come alive again in your presence. I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. Don't judge his love by his fear, child. Judge it by the way his eyes follow you across a room, by how he smiles, really smiles, for the first time in years, by how he fights his own body just to stand tall for you. The choice is yours now. But remember, sometimes love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for. With all my love, Pearl. Joy pressed the letter to her chest, tears flowing freely down her cheeks, dampening the paper. She closed her eyes and remembered their last morning together. The gentle way he'd touched her face, the vulnerability in his kiss, the tremor in his voice when he whispered, "I need you," against her hair. The memory was so vivid she could almost feel the warmth of his breath. She thought about their therapy sessions, how he'd pushed through pain and fear because she asked him to trust her, how his eyes lit up the first time he stood, not with triumph, but with gratitude, how he'd looked at her like she was miracle and nightmare wrapped into one, the miracle of hope, the nightmare of possibly losing it all again. Each memory cut deeper than the last. Standing up, Joy walked to her closet and pulled out a simple blue dress. The one he'd once said brought out the color of her eyes. She changed slowly, deliberately, her mind replaying every moment they'd shared, the harsh words and tender touches, the arguments and the laughter, the way he'd tried to protect her from the media circus, not realizing his protection felt like rejection. She understood now what Pearl had seen all along. Rhett wasn't pushing her away because he didn't love her. He was pushing her away because he loved her too much to watch her suffer for loving him back. The realization washed over her like a cleansing rain. Joy stood before her mirror, smoothing her dress and taking a deep breath. Her reflection showed someone changed, someone who had learned that love wasn't just about feeling, but about choosing. She picked up her phone and dialed with newfound determination. "Yes, I need a cab," she said firmly. "As soon as possible." The dispatcher asked for her destination. Joy's voice was steady as she answered, "Mercer." The mahogany-paneled boardroom hummed with tension. Rhett Mercer sat at the head of the long table, his wheelchair pushed close to the polished wood. Board members in expensive suits shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs as Claire's attorneys presented their case for emergency conservatorship. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting striped shadows across their grim faces. "Mr. Mercer's judgment has clearly been compromised," one lawyer declared, shuffling through a stack of documents. His voice echoed in the hushed room. "This marriage to his caregiver." The double doors swung open with a decisive bang that made several board members jump. Joy Harper stood in the doorway, wearing a crisp white blazer and navy pencil skirt. Her chin was high, her eyes clear and determined. The room fell silent as every head turned toward her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the weight of their stares. "Speaking of the marriage," Joy said, her voice carrying across the stunned boardroom. "I believe I should be part of this discussion." Her hands were trembling slightly, but she clasped them together to hide it. Claire Mercer shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a private meeting. Security!" Her face flushed with anger as she pointed toward the door. "No." Rhett's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. He was staring at Joy, his face a mix of wonder and regret. Something in his eyes had softened, a crack in his usual armor. Joy walked slowly toward the table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Each step felt deliberate, meaningful. "You said you loved me," she said, looking directly at Rhett. "Prove it." Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The challenge hung in the air between them. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was thick enough to touch. Then Rhett gripped the arms of his wheelchair. Slowly, steadily, he pushed himself to his feet. Gasps echoed through the room as he stood unassisted. His knuckles were white with effort, but his gaze never left Joy's face. "My God," Claire whispered, sinking back into her chair. "I lied," Rhett announced, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I lied to the press. I lied to protect Joy, but I was really protecting myself. I was afraid of hope, afraid of love, afraid of living again." He took a careful step forward, his first in public since the stroke. "But I'm not afraid anymore." He turned to face the board members, his shoulders squared despite the slight tremor in his legs. "Dr. Harper didn't manipulate me. She healed me. She diagnosed what everyone else missed. She pushed me when I wanted to give up. And yes, I fell in love with her. Not because she tricked me, but because she saw the man I could be again." Claire's attorneys started to protest, shuffling papers and muttering among themselves, but Rhett held up his hand. "You're fired, all of you. Get out." His voice rang with the authority that had built his empire. "Dad, you can't," Claire began, her composure cracking. "I can and I am. This is still my company." Rhett's voice was firm. "I've let fear and bitterness control me for too long. It cost me my health, my family, and nearly cost me the love of my life." He turned back to Joy, his eyes softening. "I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I should have told the truth." Joy stepped closer, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're standing," she said softly, wonder filling her voice. "Because of you." Rhett reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "You didn't just heal my body. You healed my heart." Claire stormed out, her heels stabbing the floor with each angry step, her lawyers trailing behind her like ducklings. The board members sat in awkward silence until Rhett dismissed them with a wave, never taking his eyes off Joy. When they were alone, Joy touched Rhett's cheek, feeling the slight roughness of his skin beneath her fingertips. "I needed to know you'd fight for us." "I'll spend the rest of my life fighting for us," he promised, covering her hand with his own. "No more lies. No more hiding." "No more hiding," Joy agreed, her smile reaching her eyes. "And no more running away. From either of us." 1 week later, soft jazz filled the master bedroom of Mercer Manor. The wheelchair sat empty in the corner, a reminder of how far they'd come. Moonlight spilled through the open curtains as Rhett held Joy close. They swayed to the music, his steps slow but steady, their shadows dancing on the wall beside them. "I never thought I'd dance again," he murmured into her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. Joy smiled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and sure beneath her cheek. "This is the dance we were meant to have." She closed her eyes, memorizing this perfect moment. His arms tightened around her as the music played on, holding each other in the quiet victory of their love. Together, they had found something worth fighting for. Each other. If you enjoyed the story of Joy, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.